Nobody expected this to become the real story of the war. Not the tanks, not the missiles, not even the artillery, because the thing that is now tearing through Russian troops with a level of persistence, scale, and precision that modern armies were never designed to endure is something much smaller, much cheaper, and much harder to escape. It is not one superweapon. It is not one secret operation. It is a system, a kill system, a battlefield architecture that is turning entire stretches of the front into a place where movement itself has become lethal. And if you still think this war is being decided mainly by big guns, armored columns, and mass infantry charges, you are already behind. Because what is happening to Russian troops right now is not just heavy attrition. It is something more radical than that. It is the collapse of the old logic of survival on the battlefield. The front line is no longer just a line. It is a transparent, hunted, drone-saturated kill zone where Russian troops can be found, tracked, fixed, and struck with a speed that would have sounded futuristic just a few years ago. Stay with me, because this story has three layers. The first is about what is actually doing the damage. The second is about why the numbers coming out of the battlefield are so alarming for Moscow. And the third is about why this may be one of the clearest previews yet of how war is going to be fought for the next generation. Welcome back to your channel name. Let's get into it. Let's start with the first thing most people still do not fully grasp. When we say something is devastating Russian troops, we are not talking about drones in the old casual sense, as if they are just flying cameras dropping grenades. That picture is outdated. What Ukraine has built is much closer to a layered, unmanned strike ecosystem. Reconnaissance drones, FPV strike drones, interceptor drones, mid-range drones going after logistics, and electronic warfare integrated into all of it. This is not one tool. It is an entire battlefield method. Source. And according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the battlefield has changed so much that within roughly 15 kilometers of the front line, vehicle movement can be difficult to impossible because of drone saturation. Infantry are often forced to walk 10 to 15 kilometers to reach positions. Armored vehicles and artillery systems can face dozens of attacks per platform per day. Read that again. Dozens of attacks per platform per day. That is not normal attrition. That is industrialized exposure. Source. That is the real story here. Russian troops are not just being hit harder, they are operating in an environment where the battlefield sees them almost all the time. And once the battlefield sees you, the clock starts ticking. A Ukrainian officer speaking to the Associated Press put it in the simplest possible terms. This is a drone war. He said Ukraine did not choose this because it was fashionable or futuristic. It moved in that direction because it had to. Traditional intercept methods were too expensive, too slow, and often too inflexible. So Ukraine improvised, adapted, and built new systems at the speed of war. Source. That adaptation is now showing up in the numbers in a way that should make every military planner in the world pay attention. According to Ukrainian officials cited by Al Jazeera, Russia suffered 35,351 casualties in March 2026 alone, a new monthly high. Ukraine's military said drones caused 96% of those losses, while artillery and small arms accounted for the remainder. Even in a war defined by brutal attrition, that number jumps off the page. 96%. If accurate, it means the dominant instrument of battlefield damage is no longer what most 20th century armies were built around. Source. And it gets worse for Russia when you look at the efficiency of those losses. Colonel Pavlo Polisa told RBC Ukraine, as cited by Al Jazeera, that Russia suffered 316 casualties for every square kilometer it captured in the first 3 months of 2026. Last year, the figure was around 120 per square kilometer. That is not just an increase. That is a sign that the exchange rate of Russian offensive action is deteriorating fast. Moscow is still pushing, but it is paying more and more for less and less. Source. Now, here is where this gets more important than a headline about drones. The devastation is not coming only from the final strike. It is coming from the whole chain. Ukraine's commander-in-chief, Oleksandr Syrsky, said Ukrainian unmanned systems were carrying out more than 11,000 combat missions per day, and struck more than 151,000 verified targets in March alone, a 50% increase over February. That suggests scale, persistence, and targeting density that can grind down manpower, transport, supply, and command all at once. Source. And once you understand that, you understand why Russian assaults so often look fragmented, improvised, and strangely small compared with the image many people still have in their minds of a mechanized offensive. CSIS describes one Russian tactical approach as 1,000 bytes, small teams probing for gaps, trying to slip through thin points in the line, sometimes using drones and glide bombs to force openings when none exist. Why operate that way? Because large formations massed in the open are now unbelievably vulnerable. The battlefield punishes concentration. The bigger the signature, the faster the response. Source. That is why you keep seeing motorcycles, buggies, small groups, broken up formations, and rushed assaults. It is not because Russia suddenly forgot what a conventional offensive looks like. It is because a conventional offensive conducted in the old way gets spotted and torn apart in this environment. So when people ask what is devastating Russian troops, the answer is not just drones. It is the disappearance of sanctuary. It is the fact that the space between the staging point and the trench is no longer empty. It is watched, it is mapped, it is hunted. And that takes us to the second layer of the story, the math. Because wars are not won by clips on social media. They are won by whether one side can keep replacing losses, sustaining momentum, and converting blood into territorial gain. And right now, the numbers suggest Russia is facing a deeply uncomfortable equation. Ukraine's armed forces say Russia has not been able to replace all of its losses since December. Russia reportedly aimed to recruit 409,000 contract soldiers this year, which would require roughly 1,120 recruits per day. But Ukraine's I Want to Live initiative estimated Russia was recruiting closer to 940 per day in the first quarter. If that pace continued, Ukraine argued, Russia could face a shortfall of around 65,000 men by year's end. Source. Now to be clear, Russia is still dangerous. It can still attack, it can still adapt, and it still has enormous reserves of coercive power. But if your manpower replacement is lagging while your casualty per kilometer rate is exploding, the strategic warning light is flashing, and Ukraine appears to understand that very clearly. President Zelensky said in January that an optimal level for weakening Russian forces irrecoverably would be more than 50,000 Russian losses per month. Whether that target is achievable consistently is a separate question. What matters is the logic behind it. Ukraine is not just trying to hold. It is trying to force Russian offensive warfare into a state of diminishing returns so severe that continued assaults become self-defeating. Source. And one of the ways it is doing that is by pushing the kill zone deeper behind the line. This part matters enormously. ISW reported that Ukraine's growing drone advantage is likely contributing to stalled Russian advances and recent Ukrainian counterattacks. The same assessment said Ukrainian forces sharply increased mid-range strikes into the Russian rear, with attacks on logistics facilities, warehouses, command posts, and energy infrastructure. Syrskyi credited more than 350 mid-range strikes, including attacks on 143 logistics sites and warehouses, 52 command posts, and 20 oil and energy facilities. Source. That means Russian troops are not only being hit near the trench, they are being weakened before they even get there. No fuel, no momentum. No logistics, no tempo. No command posts, no coordination. No protected rear, no reliable assault cycle. This is what makes the current battlefield so punishing. The front line and the rear are bleeding into each other. The assault group, the vehicle, the ammo dump, the drone team, the command node, the fuel point, all of it can be put under pressure as one connected system. And that is why some of the most important strikes are not the most dramatic ones. A drone taking out a soldier is brutal. A drone campaign degrading a command post is strategic. A strike on a warehouse is operational. An attack on logistics 30 to 120 kilometers behind the line can quietly ruin an offensive before the first troop even dismounts. Source. And this is where the phrase, "something is devastating Russian troops like never before," starts to make real sense. Not because no army in history has ever suffered terrible losses. They have. Not because artillery vanished. It did not. But because the mechanism of attrition is changing into something historically unusual. An environment where low-cost autonomous and semi-autonomous systems make concealment harder, movement deadlier, and tactical mistakes punishable in minutes instead of hours. Even Russian military voices, according to ISW's reporting on Millblogger claims, appear to be acknowledging that Ukraine has achieved a significant technological edge in drone warfare on parts of the battlefield. ISW noted reporting that Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov allegedly told Vladimir Putin the situation was critical because Ukraine had numerical and technological advantages in newer systems. That specific internal claim is unverified, but the fact that it is even circulating tells you how serious this problem has become in Russian discussion spaces. Source. And the battlefield examples are striking. ISW cited Russian claims that in one area near the Dnipropetrovsk-Zaporizhzhia junction, Ukrainian forces were deploying 300 to 400 drones simultaneously to a depth of 20 kilometers. Whether the exact figure fluctuates or not, the picture is clear. Density matters now. A battlefield saturated with enough unmanned systems becomes less like a front and more like an active trap. Source. Now let's go to the third layer, because this is the part that extends far beyond Russia and Ukraine. What is devastating Russian troops today may be one of the purest previews we have of how future warfare works. CSIS describes a new battle triangle built around intelligence, operations, and drones, plus electronic warfare. That phrase is important because it tells you drones are not replacing everything. They are not magic. They are not ending the need for infantry, artillery, engineers, logistics, or command. What they are doing is changing the relationship between all of those things. They extend human reach, they accelerate targeting, they compress time, and they force every army on the battlefield to adapt or die. Source. The Associated Press reported from Kharkiv that Ukrainian teams have effectively turned the front into a laboratory of rapid military innovation. Soldiers test systems, feedback results, work with manufacturers, refine designs, and send them back out. One nonprofit leader told AP that what people once dismissed as air defense for the poor is sometimes proving more effective than air defense for the rich. That line is bigger than it sounds. It means cheap, adaptable, decentralized systems are no longer just auxiliary tools. In some roles, they are becoming the main event. Source. Think about the implications of that. A system costing a few $1,000s can threaten equipment worth millions. A small unit can generate battlefield effects that used to require major fire support. A force under pressure can innovate faster than a richer force if it learns faster at the tactical edge. And the side that closes the loop between detection, decision, strike, and adjustment the fastest starts to bend the battlefield around itself. That is what Russia is running into. Not just explosions, not just casualties. A loop it is struggling to break. But this is not the place for fantasy, and this story is not one-sided. Because there are things we have to be honest about. Russia is adapting too. CSIS warns that Russia has been learning, changing tactics, and seeking ways to penetrate thin points in Ukrainian defenses. ISW also notes that Russia continues to pursue new drone technologies and may yet narrow the gap. Analysts have warned about evolving Shahed variants, higher-speed drones, improved targeting, and mesh network approaches that could threaten Ukrainian mobile air defense teams more effectively in the future. Source. This matters because the drone war is not static. It is an adaptation spiral. Ukraine innovates, Russia responds. Ukraine counters, Russia changes again. The side that wins a month may not win the next 6, and battlefield dominance in drones is not a permanent possession. It is something you re-earn constantly under fire. So no, this is not the moment to declare Russia finished. But it is absolutely a moment to recognize that something very serious is happening to Russian combat power. If drone saturation makes vehicles harder to move, if infantry have to walk long distances under observation, if logistics hubs are struck deeper in the rear, if command posts are increasingly vulnerable, if casualty rates per kilometer keep climbing, and if recruitment lags while assaults continue, then the Russian way of grinding forward starts becoming more expensive than the gains justify. Source. And that is why this story matters so much. Because when an army starts adapting its entire offensive behavior around avoiding drone detection, you are no longer just talking about a new weapon showing up on the battlefield. You are talking about a new battlefield logic taking hold. The old question used to be, can you mass enough force to break through? The new question is, can you mass anything at all without being seen, hit, and shredded before you reach the breach point? That is a revolutionary shift, and it may explain why this war increasingly looks like a collision between industrial-scale attrition and hyper-modern battlefield transparency. Russia still has artillery. Russia still has manpower. Russia still has bombs, drones, missiles, and the willingness to keep feeding men into the line. But Ukraine has found a way to make that process hurt more, cost more, and deliver less. That is why the numbers in March matter. That is why the casualty per kilometer ratio matters. That is why the 15-kilometer drone zone matters. That is why 11,000 unmanned combat missions a day matters. That is why strikes on warehouses, command posts, and logistics hubs matter. This is not background noise. This is the shape of the war changing in front of us. Source. So here is where things stand right now. Russian troops are facing a battlefield that is increasingly visible, increasingly hostile to movement, and increasingly optimized for rapid unmanned strike cycles. Ukraine appears to have built a meaningful drone advantage in key areas, according to ISW, and that advantage is helping stall Russian advances while enabling more pressure on Russian logistics and command networks. Source: Ukrainian officials say March brought a record 35,351 Russian casualties, with drones responsible for the overwhelming majority. They also say Russia's manpower replacement rate is under strain and that the cost in casualties per kilometer captured has surged. Source: Analysts say the front is now so saturated with drones that vehicle movement near the line can be nearly impossible, forcing soldiers into long-foot approaches and exposing armor and artillery to repeated attacks. Source: And perhaps most important of all, what we are seeing is not just a Ukrainian tactic. It is a warning to every army watching. Because if this model keeps evolving, then future wars may punish exposed manpower, rigid command structures, and concentrated formations more brutally and more cheaply than at any point in modern military history. That does not mean the tank disappears. It does not mean artillery disappears. It does not mean infantry disappears. It means all of them now enter a battlefield where they are being watched by machines. And once that becomes normal, everything changes. That is the story. Not that Russia is suddenly weak, not that Ukraine has found some magic answer, but that something is indeed devastating Russian troops right now with a form of persistence, density, and affordability that armies were not built to absorb indefinitely. That something is the drone kill zone, the transparent battlefield, the strike-counter-strike machine. And if you were still thinking of this war in terms of old maps, old formations, and old assumptions, you genuinely were not ready for what comes next. Because what is happening on this front is not just about Russia, it is about the future.